Drinking beer and talking to myself. This is what Sundays have come to. How's it going, guys? Spencer Sakurai here with another camera comparison, and today we are going to compare the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 4K versus a Red Dragon. Now, one camera costs $1,300 and the other costs around $20,000 to $30,000. I've done a review like this recently with the Arri Alexa XT. You can click that link up here in the corner if you want to watch that. Today we are going to do something similar, but I'm going to give you guys a little bit more taste of what they look like compared to each other. Now on this channel, I'm not going to do a lot of scientific comparisons. I'm going to do more practical scenario shooting. We're going to test cameras in a way that you would probably use them in reality. Shooting an interview, shooting a film. There really is no need to show the camera in just a random outdoor environment. Like when I'm outside and I light something, I'm going to have a bounce card. I'm going to have negative fill. I'm going to have things out there to make the image look better. And in my comparisons, I actually have a little bit of that going on, even though it was kind of a turn on the camera situation. Now, a lot of people in the last video said they wanted to see some brighter shots with a lot of sun coming in so they could really see how the two cameras compare side to side in a high lit scenario. Now I was able to do that today. There were quite a few clouds, but the clouds did clear up every once in a while, and I had kind of a sunsetty look. It was coming right into my loft, right through the windows. It was bouncing right off this white wall I have in the corner. I put my wife right in front of that, and so that acted kind of as like a nice little bounce while she was having a nice backlight from the sun. So I think this will really help. Now what was happening in this is it'd be really bright and then a cloud would come across and it would really darken the exposure. But I thought that was a kind of a good thing for us to look at. You could see the camera in a bright scenario. I had these graded in a kind of Rec 709 color space. I kind of pushed up the highlights and pulled down the shadows, and it looked pretty nice. But then when that exposure changed, you could see where each camera really could shine or fall apart. Compare the two and you guys tell me which one you think the camera is. Now, if you guessed camera A was the Pocket and camera B was the Red in this first scenario, you were correct. It's very clear that the Red has a lot more dynamic range in this situation. Once that cloud comes in, if I kept the settings all the same, you can see those shadows just crush and they go away. But on the Red, it really held up. Those shadows kind of stayed there. There's quite a bit of detail there. Obviously, the highlights look good still because the cloud came in. But if you really look at her face and her skin tones, they look way better on the Red. That doesn't mean the Pocket sucks. The Pocket is still a great camera. It's just a matter of how you use it. I wouldn't suggest using it in that environment. Shadows coming in and going away. I wouldn't do that on any video, on any camera. If I was shooting on an Alexa LF, I still wouldn't do that. I would properly control my environment. Which brings us to our next test. In the next test, we will properly control our environment. A little bit. This is the same scenario. I set up a nice key light. I bounced a bunch of LED lights into my white wall as a key coming in from over here. And the sun was in the background and it was shifting like it was in the original test. So you'll see that again here. The key light will probably stay mostly the same, but you'll see the background change and you can compare the two cameras in that changing environment. Also, just a little note, I tried to save the highlights on both cameras in this shot. In doing so, the image was a little underexposed on her face. I didn't have quite enough light power to make her face match the background, which happens very often in a scenario like this. In a cheap environment with a cheaper setup, this is what's going to happen. There's a lot of ways you can combat that. I'll probably do another video on that in the future, how you can net or ND the windows to lessen that exposure and easily make your camera work in that environment. So I set up both cameras side by side for this. The angles are a little different, but basically the same. I was shooting on the Red at 800 ISO and the Pocket at 400 ISO. Those are their natives. But once I brought it into the computer, I didn't really think it was fair comparing those two ISOs because those are different exposures. So I brought the Red down to 400 ISO, which is still gonna have plenty of dynamic range. Probably more dynamic range than the Pocket in that situation. So I think this was a pretty fair comparison. That to be said, the face was underexposed, so I pushed both these images quite a bit, added just a hair of noise reduction. That might make some people angry, but I think it makes it for a fair comparison. You can really see how they both shine in the background and in the foreground. The cloud comes in and lessens the exposure. All right, so here's the comparison. Try to guess which camera is which. If you guessed camera A was the red and camera B was the pocket, you were wrong. Camera B was actually the red and camera A was the pocket. I think it's a pretty clear difference here again. The skin tones are just way prettier on the red, and it just did not fall apart when that cloud came in. Both of them still looked really good though. I think if you were able to control the background more, the pocket would be fine. If I had just a little bit more light for a key light or maybe a little bit more light for a background light, I think these both could perform adequately in this environment. And on to the third segment of this comparison. But first, beer break. Fresh hopped IPA. Now, I don't really plan to do a lot of comparisons like this on this channel. I probably still will. I think it is important to be able to see both cameras in the same environment. Because in the last video, I wasn't able to do that. I didn't have an Alexa XT handy, so I just tried to prove that you could take a $1,300 camera and shoot a very similar shot and it would look almost identical. And especially if you didn't have them side by side. If you did not have those two images in the last video side by side, who would be the wiser? I mean, the image still helps tell the story and set a mood. So I want to convey that again with this test. So where did I go? I went to David Fincher's films, obviously. He shoots almost everything on red, so I thought one of his films would be a good comparison. Social Network, probably the film that I've watched more than any other film. I know that may be surprising. No, it's not Godfather. I know the first scene very well. It's a 9-minute scene. They did 99 takes on this scene, and they shot it on the Red Epic MX, I believe. Which I think this would be a good comparison because the original Epic MX actually had a dynamic range of 13 stops, which is what this camera's rated at too. And to make it more interesting, I thought we would shoot it at 3200 ISO. I feel like a lot of people are going to buy this camera for its low light capability, and I thought it'd be fun to show that off. Now, this is a pretty dimly lit scene in reality, and it turned out really well, I think. I lit this with just 2 LED light panels in the back. They're not super bright. I would say that they're about a 300 to a 500 watt equivalent if you were talking about a tungsten unit. So shooting at 3200 ISO was kind of a crazy idea. First off, I hadn't tested it thoroughly. I didn't know if it was going to come out noisy or not. But I think what saved me on this was shooting at 3200 ISO gave me an okay exposure. But if you throw one of David Fincher's films into a computer and look at the histogram, you'll notice that once he colors the image, he pulls everything down to the toe of that image. He puts it between 0 IRE and like 30 IRE. That's insane. Like when you shoot an image, you're trying to get it somewhere between like 40 and 80, get the meat of it there, and then you can move it around in post. And he sure does. He pulls it all the way down. Almost his entire film is dark like that. I think that really helped make this image look amazing. So it's at 3200 ISO, and in the log format, it was pretty noisy. But once I pulled that image way down to the toe, added a little contrast, bumped up the saturation just a little bit, that noise had gone away, and the image started to look really good. Very comparable to the red, actually. Now, I wasn't able to use the exact same light. I just took what I know about lighting to make it work. I've seen the behind the scenes photos. I think they were using Kinos pretty close to the subject just to kind of wrap around their faces. So I didn't have Kinos, but I have these little LED lights. I put those behind a $12 shower curtain. Well, first, an awful lot of people made my source large, made it soft, got it close to my wife's face, got it close to my face for these close-ups, and I think it really worked out. I set the camera to 5600 Kelvin, which is the daylight setting, but I kept the lights on a tungsten setting. That helped to give that nice yellow effect. And then in post, I added a little bit of green and added a little reds to the skin tones to warm up the skin and make the green background, which is very common in most Fincher films. I think I did a pretty good job matching it. Now, I was not in a bar, so you'll notice that it's obviously my kitchen and a white wall, but I worked around that. I put a bunch of black on the walls to kind of really bring down that scene and make it a darker scene. The only thing I wish I would have had for this comparison was haze. I think the haze really would have made the shots look more comparable.
Well, first, an awful lot of people live in China, but here's my question. How do you distinguish yourself in a population of people who all got 1600 on their SATs?
I didn't know they take SATs in China.
They don't. I wasn't talking about China anymore. I was talking about me.
You got a 1600?
Yes, I could sing in an acapella group, but I can't
Does that
sing.
mean you actually got nothing
I could
wrong?
row crew or invent a $25 PC.
Or you get into a final club?
Or I get into a final club.
Let me know if you think the camera held up this time. Personally, I think it did really well. I think it's crazy that I shot the whole scene at 3200 ISO. I've never shot anything in my entire career of 10 years at 3200 ISO and it come out looking this good. Once again, this just goes back to intentionality. If you have a clear idea of what you want something to look like, you can prepare for that. Now, I didn't even have all the best things in the world, $12 shower curtain and some cheap LEDs, but I was still able to get really close to what Fincher did on his multi-million-dollar budget. Thanks for watching. I hope you liked my comparison. And until next time, cheers.